believe your favorite cut of beef is actually oxtail?
That's correct.
Okay,
Oxtail.
so sell the audience on oxtail for a moment.
It's difficult to sell it. You know, I can just tell you that if you try my mom's oxtail, or the one I make with ragu and pappardelle, you would be completely convinced.
That's right, you're a bit of a cook yourself, right?
I like to cook, yes.
What's your favorite thing you cook?
Pasta. Actually, I'm not a very good barbecue cook.
Really?
I cannot cook barbecue very well. I always get the point of meat, like the temperature wrong.
For the uninitiated, JBS is owned by your family, the Batistas. You are the third generation, but you have kind of an interesting entry into JBS, right? I mean, when you were a teenager, your first job, I believe you were on the plant line in Greeley and then went on to run a processing plant at age 19 in South America?
Yes.
What did you learn from that?
So just as a background, my grandfather founded JBS in the 50s, so he's still in the, in the beef business, but he's a cow-calf producer today, and he's in his 90s today. He's turning 93 and still going hard. My father and my uncle worked and grew the company to where it is. And yes, I started actually in Uruguay. My first job was in Greeley, Colorado, as starting to learn about the business. And then I had the opportunity to run a small beef facility in Uruguay at age 19 to 20. So it was a big experience, living alone very early. And we joke that I got my PhD there, which is my packing house degree. So it's got my PhD there.
What was the biggest thing you learned doing that? I mean, at 19, any hard lessons there?
Well, you have to learn everything from scratch, right? And the way we manage our businesses is full autonomy to the business unit. So even though it was a small business unit, I actually had the operations on the buy, make, and sell. So that, as we say it, and all the other support areas. So we're basically running a small company alone. So that was a fun period of my life for sure.
Now we've heard a lot about protein demand today. At JBS, you're with your ownership of Pilgrim's, number 2 in chicken, number 2 in pork, and the top beef processor in the U.S. How are you taking advantage of this moment in America's obsession with protein?
Yeah, I think that more than just an obsession, more than just a trend that we're seeing, we see that our opinion of this whole protein focus is more to do with people understanding the fundamentals of nutrition better. If we were seeing some diets that focused on taking more protein, like the Atkins diet or something like that, or carnivore diet, then those things come and go. Nobody can keep a diet for very long. Everybody that has tried it, nobody lives on a diet. Everybody tries it for a period of time. But now understanding how protein is good for your health, good for longevity, I think that's a fundamental knowledge that people have, and I think it's much more fundamental than just a trend or just a diet or just something that comes and goes. I think it's something that is here to stay, and it's just a better understanding of how our bodies run.
Well, you guys continue to expand deeper into proteins. You recently bought a Food Forum guest from last year, Hickman's Egg Ranch. Yes. Who was on the stage. You guys bought him and entered the egg business for the first time. Why eggs, and what do you see more expansion there? Yeah,
so we've grown a lot into our beef, pork, and chicken markets. We're number 1 in beef in the world. We're number 1 in chicken in the world if you include all of our other facilities outside, and number 2 in pork. And recently we got into 2 different proteins that we're excited about. One is actually salmon, and we have a salmon production in Australia, and it's a market that we're very excited to learn. And we got a JV with a family that has been in the egg business for a long time, and we acquired together this Hickman's facility in Arizona. It's great. If you think about and I learned this with them, and I think it's fascinating. If you think about eggs, right? The egg, inside of an egg, there is everything that that life needs, because life will come out of that. So if you think about it, the most complete food that you can ever have, the most completely the food that has all the requirements for your nutrition is eggs. So it's something we believe a lot in. Plus, it's really affordable and pretty efficient.
It's very philosophical as well.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll continue to invest? You've also been investing in more packaged meats and kind of prepared food space and capitalizing a little bit on protein demand, building a couple new facilities, I believe, in Iowa. Do you expect to continue to expand there, invest in it, and also maybe acquire a brand, acquire a big meat brand, like an Oscar Mayer, for example, or something along those lines?
So what we've done over time is we've built this platform of commodity on the more commodity side of production, and we think that's a big strength. And on top of that, we've been building value-added and branded. We've done that in every market. We're doing that here in every market that we operate. We're large packaged food players in Brazil, in Australia, in the UK, in Mexico, and here in the US, we've had a lot of success with our frozen chicken brand, Just Bear. We've just reached 12 to 13% market share. Just reached $1 billion of retail sales, so that's a big success for us. So we are building 2 new facilities, one in Iowa and one in Georgia. We announced about $800 million of investment into expansion or greenfield in the US for this year, and it's something that we're going to see more and more, that we're going to put more value added and branded into our portfolio as a complement to what we already do. And we see that what we have is a big strength. It's a big actually advantage for us to be able to build that value added and branded platform. Now, acquisitions is always something that we grew a lot by acquisition. That was most of our growth has come through acquisition, but those things are very, based on opportunity. So these things are, but our focus, no question, is to grow on value-added and branded, that's for sure.
And eggs.
And eggs as well.
Going in eggs. When we saw each other a few weeks ago in New York, I think it was actually Fabio at Pilgrim's who mentioned that with the high prices of beef, there's less trading into chicken than I think he originally expected, that ground beef demand has actually stayed pretty stable. Yeah. So is beef inelastic?
I think that for a big chunk of the population of consumers, beef is a must-have, and it has to do a lot with the sort of quality that we are able to produce here in the U.S. When you look at what the U.S. is in the beef industry, is we are able to produce at a very large scale, very, very top quality beef. If you compare the average quality of beef that we produce here in the U.S. with most of the countries that actually produce beef, our average would be similar to their premium beef. So we produce great beef in the U.S., and I think the strong demand it's a big sign of that.
Even with ground beef, but also I think you mentioned to me like Wagyu steaks, still pretty high. Why are people still buying? Is it just the quality?
It's really good. Have you tried it? It's amazing. It's really good. But joking aside, I think we've always thought that there was a bigger substitution, but it's a lot to do with again just how good the product is.
Even with all this demand for beef, it is now arguably one of the worst times to be in the meat processing business, with the cattle herd at its lowest level in 75 years. Yes. Can you just walk us through why meat packers are losing money despite this robust demand we're talking about?
Supply and demand, pretty simple. There is a lot more processing capacity than there is cattle out there. Obviously, we have capacity for a lot more production. And supply of cattle is probably one of the most inelastic things you could have. If a cow-calf producer decides today to start increasing their herd, they're going to probably see a calf born next year, and then it's going to take another 2 or years or a little bit more for that animal to be ready for processing, and so a decision today is going to impact supply basically 3-4 years from now. So it's a very inelastic supply. Production capacity is there, and yeah, that creates a lack of cattle and a tougher profitability on the cattle side.
When are ranchers going to rebuild their herds?
It's a pretty cyclical market. I found an almanac from the 1960s. It was published in the 1960s that revealed the last 100 years of cattle production in the
Some light
USA.
reading.
Huh?
Some light reading.
Yeah, some good reading. It's history. And they had a nice graph, probably drawn by hand, of how cyclical it was then. So it's been cyclical for over 100 years, almost 200 years now. And it's always going to be cyclical like that. It's cyclical everywhere as well, not just in the U.S. A few years ago, when we had a lot of cattle here in the U.S., we actually had a shortage in Australia and Brazil. So that's kind of normal, which actually for us is our geography and our protein diversification it's a big strength of JBS today. So at the moment where there is a lack of cattle somewhere, we also have a little bit more of a surplus in other countries, and also having multiple proteins allows us to have this diversification. So it's a big part of our business model.
Well, you mentioned there's too much packing capacity. We saw rival Tyson Foods close the plant earlier this year. Is JBS going to close a plant?
We're actually doing something different. We are taking the time now to modernize our Texas plant in Cactus, which is kind of counterintuitive. We knew that we needed to revamp that facility for it to be ready for the next 30, 40, 50 years. And at the time when the margins were a lot better in this industry at the top of the cycle, we decided not to do that back then and actually postpone it. And we're doing it right now. We were actually just did a groundbreak facility there, or event there in that facility, and we're actually going to try to modernize this plant for when this turns. That's going to be hopefully the best plant in Texas.
So you like your plants, you're investing in them, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is staying at the plant level for a moment, what fallout has the meat industry seen from the Trump administration's immigration crackdown?
We actually don't see in our industry, at least within JBS, we don't see a shortage of labor right now, which is very different. I mean, since 2018, if I got asked a question like that, I would have said that labor is probably one of the biggest bottlenecks in our industry. Not so much. And I think a big part of that, and we ask ourselves, what has really changed? Obviously, there is market dynamics. But, especially in beef and pork packing houses, it's relatively very, competitive compensation versus what you see in the market. In a beef plant, you could see people earning, depending on if it's a skilled job, something like $32 an hour, $35 an hour, and you get a family making that sort of money. It's plus some of the benefits. We just implemented a variable pension plan, which is for people that work with us for a long time. It's a big deal. And so we haven't seen, actually we're seeing good labor supply right now.
Is turnover down?
Turnover is really down.
Why is that? Is it just pay, or is there other
I think a
factors?
big part of it is what we're doing from a pay and benefits perspective.
Okay. Staying at the plant level, can you automate your way out of some of this? I mean, if labor is not a problem, but are there advances in automation? How is AI affecting things at the plant level? And any changes there?
Yeah, automation is something that it's a reality in a business like ours. We have overall within JBS 280,000 team members. In the US, it's 76,000 team members. So we employ a lot of people, and obviously when there is automation that makes sense, it's something that really matters for our industry because it's so labor intensive. But you're always going to see in our industry, in my opinion, you're always going to see chicken be automated easier than pork, which is easier than beef because it's a smaller animal, more uniform. But also you're always going to see the warehouse and then the packaging and then going to processing. Actually, automatizing and actually getting automation in some of these beef plants on the processing side, it's very, very difficult to defend. So it's a lot about training people and having a good labor force that knows what they're doing.
Gotcha. On the beef side, with beef prices being as high as they are, we've reported at the Journal that the administration's considered lifting certain tariff rate quotas on Brazil and other beef importers into the U.S. I'd like to get your perspective. Would increased beef imports from Brazil, would that actually help prices? How would that impact the American consumer?
So what I think there's a couple of things to talk about that. First of all, it's, like I said, very inelastic supply for live cattle. So in the short term, what can you do? We're having a challenge with this whole screw worm situation in Mexico. About 5% of the U.S.'s processing capacity, 5% of that cattle was usually used to be born in Mexico and come very early on to the U.S. and be raised in the U.S. and then processed in the U.S. And that border has been shut for quite a while. I think the biggest thing, obviously the USDA is doing the right thing in protecting and making sure that that doesn't enter the US. And so they're doing a great job there, protecting the health of the American herd. But having said that, that's the biggest thing that can happen in the short term to change beef supply. Imports, I think, there is a role for imports from countries like Australia, like Brazil, and it's actually very complementary. Because we're so good in the US at making high marbled beef, part of that, a consequence of that is that you have a lot of trimmings or, that is fatter. And having availability of lean trim that comes from some of these markets to blend actually makes the whole animal more competitive. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but actually having availability of lean imports actually supports us to be able to continue to produce high marbled beef. Part of what we produce in grain-fed cattle is what we call trim, 50% fat, 50% lean. That's not edible. You can't eat that. You have never eaten a burger that's 50-50. And it's more expensive than chicken breast and pork loin. And there is a reason for that. It's because we have the availability of lean. If we didn't have the availability of lean, that's probably going to be worth less. And in the whole equation of beef, if you didn't have the 50s at that price, you probably need steaks to be higher to pay for the same amount of cattle. So it's actually, if anything, it makes having high quality steaks more competitive. So it's a little bit counterintuitive.
Makes sense. What about Brazil's been improving some of their infrastructure, I think they're adding more feedlot capacity. Is there a future where the U.S. is importing more primal cuts out of Brazil, or they become the dominant beef exporter globally if they start finishing cattle on grain and produce kind of that similar marbling to the U.S.?
When I look at the beef industry in the U.S. in the long run, to me it's very clear that the U.S. is not structurally an importer of beef. Mm-hmm. It's a situational importer of beef, not structurally. Structurally, the U.S. is an exporter of beef. We have the land here, we have the culture to do it, and it's a big deal to have the culture. Ranchers in the United States know what they're doing, and they are actually the best ranchers everywhere, and everybody actually wants to learn with what gets done here in the U.S. So I really think that the U.S. is among the most competitive places to produce beef in the world. That's why for us, our U.S. beef business is a lot bigger than even our Brazilian business. That's where we started. We love our Brazilian business. We think there is a lot of future there, but I don't think that comes at the expense of anything that we do here in the U.S. It's actually quite the contrary. I think the U.S. eventually gets this herd rebuilt and actually goes back to being a net exporter of beef out of the United States.
Gotcha. Speaking of U.S. beef, the Trump administration has shifted the focus a little bit on talking about, during these high prices of beef, shifting their focus to talking about the meat packers and the market power of the Big Four, criticizing others and JBS's foreign ownership. But what do you make of that, and why does that keep happening? Is there something you want people to know about that?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, our biggest operation is here in the U.S. About 50% of our revenues are here in the United States. When we look at where we want to grow our operation, and we've been doing that by building new plants, is here in the U.S. We're actually quite bullish investing in the U.S. And we've if you look at percentage of our capex this year and where we're growing, it's here. There is very few countries in the world that has the know-how and the resources, natural resources to do what we do, plus the legal stability and all of that. So we're actually the biggest business by far. So today JBS is 50% US, 25% Brazil, and the other 25% would be Australia, the UK, and some other markets like Canada, like Mexico, like other countries in Europe. So actually, I think that percentage might actually continue to grow. We continue to be very, very excited about growing in the U.S.
So what is JBS going to look like in the U.S. in 5 years?
More processing, as in value added. You could probably see us do what we did in Just Bear in other categories. That's our goal, and probably be a larger percentage of our revenue come from the U.S.
Gotcha. We're running a little bit low on time. We'll take a question or two from the audience if anybody's got one. Let's see if we've got one. We've got one from a gentleman right up here. He raised his hand. No, he lowered his hand. Oh. There we go. Get a microphone.
It's always great to see you. Rich Kottmeyer, Chief Strategy Officer of FutureBridge, founder of Consumer Moments. My question for you is, when you think about technology, and was on Fauci's COVID Council, when you think about technology and you think about food safety, the sheer number of cuts now that you go through in opening up a cattle carcass is amazing relative to 20 years ago. How is technology and AI allowing you to really predict how you want to cut that cow for maximum value? And then what impact is that sheer number of cuts having on your food safety protocols? Yeah,
so the food safety is the ticket of entry for our industry. You can't operate in our industry if you're not, top notch at that. And we have a good track record that we're very proud of, and when it comes to innovation in food safety, it's something that it's top of mind for us, and not only on beef, but in every protein that we operate in. So it's a big deal for us. When it comes to, yes, it's very complex to be able to, do more cuts and add more value, and we use a lot of information. I mean, obviously AI kind of powers everything we've been doing for a long time, but having software that helps us predict where demand is going to be and how we should apply that demand to the complexity that we have is something that we've been applying that actually for decades now. Obviously, AI kind of powers that faster and makes it more fine-tuned, but it's something that we've been doing for actually quite a long time.
Wesley, with our last 30 seconds here, but I want to ask you, just given kind of what we've seen in the beef industry with the lack of rebuilding over the last couple of years. I know you mentioned the history, and even there's still some of the critics from some ranching groups and such. Do you think anything needs to change structurally in the beef supply chain in the U.S.? Is there any fundamental changes that we need?
Look, we're a big advocate for removing any barrier for overregulation or challenges that cattle producers might have. We're a big advocate for that. Now, I think, again, the U.S. has all the resources, has the know-how, has the supply chain. I think we just need good weather and the economics to continue to look like what it looks like for cattle ranchers, for them to be profitable and for them to be successful. And if they're successful, then the whole industry is going to be successful.